Get out.
Ma'am, this is my house.
Your house? Look at yourself. Paint on your hands, mud on your boots, squatting in a shack with no running water. You're not a homeowner.
I have a deed. I bought this at a county auction.
I don't care. This mountain belongs to people who actually belong here. You are not one of them. 72 hours or I tear this place down.
I'm not leaving.
Honey, you don't own anything up here.
She said it with a smile. White teeth, perfect lips, zero warmth. She had no idea I owned the entire mountain, 720 acres, including the ground her own mansion was sitting on. What she started that day cost her everything. My name is Ethan Cole, and for 22 years, I made my living as a licensed land surveyor in East Tennessee. I measured property lines, settled boundary disputes, and mapped mineral rights for landowners who didn't know what they were sitting on. I was good at it, quiet, careful, precise. The kind of man who noticed when a fence post was 6 inches past the section line. The kind of man nobody paid attention to until they needed him. My wife Sarah was the opposite. Loud laugh, big heart, the one who remembered every neighbor's birthday and kept wildflowers in a mason jar on the kitchen table. We had 20 years together. Then a logging truck ran a red light on Highway 321 outside Gatlinburg, and I had 19 years of memories and a house full of rooms that still smelled like her lavender shampoo. I sold the house in Knoxville 8 months later. Couldn't sit at that kitchen table. Couldn't look at that empty mason jar. Couldn't walk past her closet without reaching for a coat that still held the shape of her shoulders. I started hiking, not for exercise, for silence. The Smoky Mountains don't ask you questions or tell you they're sorry. They just let you walk. It was October when I found the house. A 2-story log cabin on the eastern slope of Chilhowie Mountain, halfway between the ridgeline and the valley floor. The porch had collapsed on one side. Vines crawled through the shattered front windows like the forest was slowly swallowing it back. The front door hung on one hinge, and when I pushed it open, the air inside tasted like cedar dust and forgotten time. I stood in the living room and listened. Wind through the broken glass. The creak of warped floorboards under my boots. A woodpecker somewhere in the rafters, tapping out a rhythm that echoed through the empty rooms. Something about the silence in that house felt different from the silence in my old one. This silence wasn't grief. It was patience. Like the house was waiting for someone to come back. I drove to the county clerk's office the next morning. Parcel 114-007720 acres, encompassing the entire mountain, including the cabin, all mineral rights, water rights, and the access road. Owned by the late Harlan Whitfield, died 2013, no surviving heirs. 11 years of unpaid property taxes. The county had scheduled a tax sale auction for the following Tuesday. I was the only bidder, $47,000 for an entire mountain. That first week I patched the roof with salvaged tin, replaced 2 windows, and ran a generator off the back porch for light and a hot plate. I slept on an air mattress in the living room and woke up every morning to fog rolling through the valley below like a slow white river. It was the first time in 3 years I didn't dread opening my eyes. On day 3 I heard the engine, a low, expensive purr coming up the gravel road, the kind of sound that doesn't belong on a mountain. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee and watched a white Range Rover Velar round the last switchback and park 10 feet from my truck. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a woman who looked like she'd been styled for a magazine shoot and accidentally wandered into the wilderness. Platinum blonde hair in perfect waves that didn't move in the wind. Sun-kissed skin that came from a bottle, not a field. Olive Barber jacket, cinched tight at the waist, over leather riding pants and knee-high fry boots with not a single scuff on them. Gucci sunglasses pushed up on her head like a crown. Her nails were perfect white French tips, no chips, no dirt, not a single crack. She smelled like jasmine and entitlement. She smiled at me the way you smile at a stray dog you're about to call animal control on. Hi there, I'm Vivian Holt, president of Ridgecrest Estates Homeowners Association. She gestured vaguely toward the valley. And I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. She explained, calmly, sweetly, the way a teacher explains something to a slow child, that the abandoned cabin had been under HOA stewardship for years, that the board had voted to convert it into a community clubhouse, and that whoever sold me this property had made a terrible mistake. I showed her my deed. She glanced at it the way you glance at a parking ticket before throwing it away. "Sweetie," she said, "a piece of paper from a tax auction doesn't override 7 years of community investment. We've maintained this road. We've kept hikers off this mountain. This is our property now." "It's not," I said. Her smile didn't waver, not even a millimeter. "I've dealt with squatters before, Mr. Cole. They always leave. Some just take longer than others." She climbed back into the Range Rover, checked her lipstick in the rearview mirror, and drove down the mountain without looking back. I should have taken her more seriously. But when you've spent 22 years reading land records and property deeds, you tend to trust paperwork over pageantry. I had the deed. The county had my name on file. The law was clear. I went back to fixing my house. 2 days later, I drove down the mountain for supplies: lumber, roofing nails, a new battery for the generator, canned food. The round trip to the hardware store in Maryville took 4 hours. When I turned off the county road and onto the gravel access that led up to my property, I found the road blocked. 3 dump trucks worth of crushed rock and felled pine trees had been piled across the road at the exact point where the mountain trail met the paved entrance to Ridgecrest Estates. The barrier was 6 feet high and 40 feet across. Professional work. Someone had paid for this. I parked my truck at the base and stared at it for a long time. Then I loaded the lumber onto my back and started walking. 2.2 miles uphill on switchbacks, October in the Smokies, and the air was sharp enough to sting my lungs on the steep sections. I made 4 trips that day. Lumber on the first trip, the straps cutting into my shoulders through my flannel. Generator battery on the second, 42 pounds of dead weight that turned my forearms into burning cables by the time I reached the cabin. Roofing nails and canned food on the third. By the 4th trip, my boots were soaked through with sweat and leaf rot, and the sun was dropping behind the ridge, turning the forest floor into a dim, orange tunnel. I called the county road department the next morning. A woman named Patty in the permits office told me the blockade was on private HOA property, and they couldn't intervene without a formal complaint and a surveyor's report proving otherwise. I knew she was wrong. That road was on my parcel, but I didn't have the official survey ready yet. That would take time. It was Dale Sutter who found me that evening. Dale was 72, a retired carpenter who'd lived in a small cabin at the base of the mountain for 30 years outside the HOA boundary on his own 5 acres. He came walking up the trail with a flashlight in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other, moving slow but steady, the way old men move when they know every root and rock on a path. "Saw your truck parked at the bottom," he said. "Figured she'd gotten to you already." He sat on my half-finished porch and told me the history. The mountain had belonged to Harlan Whitfield since 1961. Harlan built the access road himself, chainsawed the trees, graded the dirt with a borrowed bulldozer, laid the gravel by hand over 2 summers. The HOA didn't exist until Wade Holt showed up 15 years ago. With a development plan and a stack of permits, he pushed through the planning commission. Wade bought 80 acres of flat land at the base from old Harlan's estate, Dale said. Built 52 houses, formed the HOA, paved the roads, put in a pool and a tennis court. Then they just started using Harlan's mountain road like it came with the deal. Nobody questioned it because nobody was up here to say different. Dale poured me coffee from the thermos. It was strong and bitter and exactly right. "You're the 4th person she's come after," he said quietly. "The last family, the Burks, Vivian got the county to condemn their deck over some made-up code violation, then filed a lien on their house for unpaid HOA assessments they never agreed to pay. They sold it a $60,000 loss and moved to Alabama. Didn't even fight it, just packed up and left." I learned something useful that night. In Tennessee, a tax sale deed conveys all rights the previous owner held, including access easements, mineral rights, and water rights, unless specifically excluded in the auction terms. Mine weren't excluded. The county clerk's original record was the authority, not Vivian Holt's interpretation of what she thought she deserved. I started building a file. Photographs of the blockade with GPS coordinates and timestamps, copies of my deed, a printout of the county's tax auction terms, every interaction with Vivian written down the same night, with dates, times, and exact quotes. My surveyor instincts hadn't gone anywhere. I just hadn't needed them for a while. I called Sheriff Tom Garrison the following morning and filed a formal complaint about the road blockade. The sheriff came out that afternoon, a tall, lean man with a gray mustache and the patient expression of someone who'd seen too many neighbor disputes to get excited about one more. He looked at my deed. He looked at the blockade. He drove down to Vivian's house and told her contractors to remove it. They did. Over 4 days, 1 truckload at a time, slowly enough to make sure I hiked every trip in between. The following week, a certified letter arrived from the HOA's attorney. It demanded payment of $12,400 in back HOA assessments for the mountain property, plus a $700 road maintenance fee. The letter stated in careful legal language that the mountain parcel had been part of Ridgecrest Estates since the HOA's formation. I read it once, folded it, put it in the file. I drove to Knoxville the second week of November to empty my storage unit. Sarah's watercolor paintings, my survey equipment family photo albums, the quilt her mother made for our wedding. Everything I'd boxed up when I sold the house because I couldn't bear to look at it and couldn't bear to throw it away. I loaded it all into the truck bed, covered it with a tarp, and drove back to the mountain, feeling like I was finally bringing the last pieces of my old life into the new one. The drive up the gravel road was clear the blockade was gone, at least for now. But when I pulled up to the cabin, something was wrong. The front door was closed, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the lock. A brand new Schlage deadbolt brass, still shiny. My key didn't fit. A laminated notice was taped to the door at eye level, block letters on white cardstock. By order of Ridgecrest Estates, HOA. This structure has been secured pending safety review. Unauthorized entry is criminal trespassing. V. Holt, President. I stood there for a long time reading it twice. Then I walked around the house. My belongings were in the backyard, not packed, not stacked, dragged. Someone had pulled everything out through the back door and left it in the dirt. My clothes were in a heap near the tree line. My toolbox had been tipped on its side, wrenches scattered in the mud. The air mattress was deflated and draped over a stump like a dish rag. And then I saw the box. A cardboard moving box, the kind you get from U-Haul. It had been sitting in my living room, taped shut, labeled in my own handwriting, Sarah, personal. Inside were her journals, the leather-bound ones she wrote in every morning before work. Inside was our wedding photo, the one from the courthouse steps, her in a yellow sundress, me in a borrowed blazer, both of us laughing at something the photographer had said. It was the only copy. The box was on its side in the grass. It had rained 2 days ago. The cardboard was soft and dark, half collapsed. I knelt down and opened it. The journals were soaked. The ink had bled through the pages, her handwriting, her thoughts, her daily record of our life together, dissolving into blue smears that ran off the paper and stained my fingers. The wedding photo was still in its frame, but water had seeped under the glass. The image was warped, a brown waterline cutting across the bottom third, right across our shoes and the courthouse steps. I sat in the wet grass and held that frame for a long time. The mountain was quiet. No wind, no birds, just the sound of water dripping from the eaves of a house someone had locked me out of. She would have known what to do, I said to nobody. She always did. I called Sheriff Garrison. He arrived within the hour, looked at the new lock, read the laminated sign, and shook his head slowly. He used a pry bar to pop the deadbolt without damaging the door frame. He'd done this before. Mr. Cole, he said, I've told Mrs. Holt she has no authority over this property, but she keeps pushing it. You might want to get yourself a lawyer. While the sheriff was still writing up his report, the white Range Rover appeared on the gravel road. Vivian stepped out holding a Yeti tumbler, something iced with a straw, and walked toward us in tan suede ankle boots and a camel-colored cashmere wrap that probably cost more than my generator. She saw the sheriff and didn't flinch, not a blink. Sheriff Garrison, I was just trying to protect community property. Her voice was honey poured over broken glass. If this man has a valid claim, I'm sure the courts will sort it out. She looked past him, past me, at the pile of my belongings in the backyard. Her eyes landed on the soaked cardboard box, the ruined journals, the warped photograph. She looked at them the way you'd look at trash someone forgot to take to the curb. I had my maintenance crew secure the building, she said. If personal items were left inside an abandoned structure, that's not really our responsibility, is it? The sheriff stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then he put his notebook in his pocket and said, Ma'am, I'd recommend you stop coming up this mountain. She smiled. That same smile, white teeth, perfect lips, zero warmth. Of course, Sheriff, whatever you say. That night, she emailed every household in Ridgecrest Estates. the squatter situation on the mountain has been resolved. The board is moving forward with clubhouse renovation plans as scheduled. I found out later what she'd done was illegal. In Tennessee, changing locks on a property you don't own, even if you believe you have a claim, constitutes unlawful entry and illegal lockout under TCA Section 29-18-101. It can result in civil damages, attorney's fees, and in cases involving personal property destruction, criminal charges for vandalism. I dried Sarah's journals on the windowsill, page by page. Most of the words were gone, but a few pages survived enough to read her handwriting one more time, enough to remember the way she pressed hard on the downstrokes and looped her G's like figure eights. I put the wedding photo back on the wall. New glass, same frame. The waterline stayed. I kept it that way on purpose. It was Dale who showed me the listing. He walked up the trail one morning with his phone held out at arm's length, squinting at the screen, the way people do when they refuse to admit they need reading glasses. "You seen this?" he said. It was Zillow. The mountain cabin, my mountain cabin, listed as a community renovation project under Ridgecrest Estates HOA. There were 7 photos. I recognized every one of them because they were photos of work I had done. My new roof patches, my replaced windows, my cleared porch swept clean of 11 years of leaves and debris, my fresh coat of primer on the front railing, all of it presented under the heading HOA-led renovation of historic mountain property coming soon as Ridgecrest Community Clubhouse. The listing even had a projected completion date, April of next year, as if I'd be gone by then. I sat at my kitchen table that night, laptop open, the glow of the screen the only light in the cabin. The coffee in my mug had gone cold 2 hours ago. Outside, coyotes yipped somewhere on the south ridge, a thin, wild sound that rose and fell with the wind. I screenshotted every page of the listing, every photo, the description, the contact information, the timestamp. I saved them all in the file. But the Zillow listing wasn't the real threat. The real threat arrived 3 days later in an envelope from the county building department. Vivian had filed a formal petition to have my cabin condemned and demolished as an unsafe abandoned structure posing imminent risk to the health and safety of Ridgecrest Estates residents. The petition was signed by Vivian Holt and co-signed by 5 members of the HOA board. It included a 12-page exhibit of photographs, the same cabin, but shot from angles that made it look as ruined as possible. Before my repairs, before I'd touched a single board. She'd been keeping those old photos for exactly this purpose. The petition was routed to the County Planning Commission for review. The chairman of the County Planning Commission was Wade Holt, Vivian's husband. Wade signed the demolition review order within 48 hours. He didn't recuse himself. He didn't disclose his wife's involvement. He didn't mention that he was the developer who built Ridgecrest Estates. He just signed it, stamped it, and scheduled a county building inspector to visit my cabin in 2 weeks. I attended the Planning Commission's next public meeting. I wore clean jeans and a button-down shirt and sat in the 3rd row. When public comment opened, I stood up, stated my name, presented my deed, and explained, calmly, clearly, the way you explain boundary evidence in a deposition, that I was actively renovating the cabin and living in it full-time, that the structure was sound, that the petition was filed by someone who had already illegally locked me out and destroyed my personal property. Wade Holt sat at the commissioner's table in a Navy sport coat, hands folded, watching me with the polished patience of a man who signs papers for a living. "Mr. Cole," he said, "the commission has a duty to protect public safety. Your renovation, however well-intentioned, doesn't change the structural concerns raised by community members. The review will proceed as scheduled." I looked at Vivian. She was sitting in the 2nd row, legs crossed, cream cashmere sweater, pearl studs, a leather portfolio on her lap. She was smiling, not at me, at her husband, the kind of smile 2 people share when the script is going exactly as rehearsed. I walked out of that building knowing 2 things. First, that I wasn't fighting one person. I was fighting a system, a husband and wife machine that had been running this county for over a decade. Second, that machines have blueprints, and blueprints have measurements, and measurements don't lie. It was Dale who said it in the parking lot, leaning against my truck with his hands in his jacket pockets. Son Wade Holt built that whole subdivision. He's been chairing the Planning Commission for 12 years. He signs off on his own projects, always has. Dale looked at the courthouse and shook his head. "You're not fighting a Karen, you're fighting a machine." Something Dale had said weeks ago came back to me. Wade built the subdivision. On what land? Whose land exactly? How much of it? I'm a surveyor. These aren't philosophical questions for me. They're math. I drove home and went straight to the back of my truck. My old survey equipment was still packed in its case: theodolite GPS unit, steel measuring tape, orange flagging ribbon, iron stakes, a 4-pound mallet. I hadn't touched any of it in 3 years. The lenses were dusty. The GPS needed a firmware update. The tape reel was stiff. I cleaned every piece, calibrated the theodolite, charged the GPS, oiled the reel. The next morning I woke before dawn, strapped the equipment to my pack, and started walking the mountain. It took me 3 days to survey the entire mountain. 720 acres of slopes, ridgelines, creek beds, and timber stands, all measured the way I'd done it 10,000 times before. Steel stakes at the section corners, orange flagging on the boundary trees, GPS coordinates logged every 50 meters. My hands blistered where the mallet handle rubbed against calluses that had gone soft over 3 idle years. On the third evening, I spread 2 maps on the kitchen table under the single lamp. The first was the original plat, filed in 1962 by Harlan Whitfield. Clean, precise, drawn in India ink on linen. It showed parcel 114-007, covering the entire mountain from the ridgeline to the valley floor, 720 acres, including the flat land where Ridgecrest Estates now stood. The second was Wade Holt's subdivision plat, filed in 2011. It showed Ridgecrest occupying 80 acres of flat land at the mountain's base. The boundary between his subdivision and the mountain parcel was drawn as a clean, horizontal line running east to west. I laid my survey data over both maps, and that's when I saw it. Wade's boundary line was wrong. Not by inches, not by a margin of error, by 40 acres. Whitfield's 1962 line followed the true base of the mountain, the natural contour where flat ground meets slope. Wade's 2011 line was shifted 400 meters uphill. On paper, a minor adjustment. On the ground, 40 acres of stolen mountainside. 12 of his 52 homes, the most expensive lots built on elevated ground with mountain views, sat above the true boundary. They were on my land. The community pool was on my land. The tennis courts were on my land. The main entrance road crossed my parcel for 300 meters. And the crown jewel, Lot 47, a 5,200 square foot stone and timber mansion with a 3-car garage and a heated infinity pool, assessed at $2.4 million, built entirely on parcel 114-007. Vivian and Wade Holt's personal residence, standing on my dirt. I checked the numbers 3 times, recalculated coordinates, overlaid GPS data with the 1962 markers, the 2011 plat, and my fresh stakes. No ambiguity. Wade had moved the boundary line by 40 acres, built 12 luxury homes on land he didn't own, and filed the fraudulent plat with the county office where he served as planning commissioner. He approved his own paperwork, signed both sides. Nobody caught it because nobody was on the mountain to object. Until now. I sat there at 2 in the morning and laughed. Not because it was funny, because the irony made my chest ache. The woman who changed my locks, destroyed my wife's journals, listed my house on Zillow, and petitioned the county to demolish my cabin, her own mansion, was sitting on my mountain. Every mortgage payment she'd made for 15 years went toward a house she built on someone else's ground. I picked up the phone and called Claire Pemberton, a real estate attorney in Knoxville I'd worked with a dozen times during my surveying career. She picked up on the second ring, even at 2 in the morning. Claire, I need a quiet title action, and you're going to want to see these maps. Claire Pemberton drove up to the mountain cabin 3 days later. She spread my maps across the kitchen table, put on her reading glasses, and didn't speak for 11 minutes. I counted. When she finally looked up, she said one word: beautiful. Here's what we built. Claire filed the quiet title action in Chancery Court, case number 2024-CV-1147, Cole versus all persons claiming interest in parcel 114-007. In plain English, that's a lawsuit asking the court to confirm who owns the disputed land. The petition named no specific defendants because a quiet title action names the property itself. But once the notice was published in the county newspaper, anyone who believed they had a claim had 30 days to respond. Vivian Holt would see her address in that notice. So would everyone else in Ridgecrest. But Claire and I agreed we wouldn't tip our hand early. The published notice used only the legal description and parcel number. No street names, no subdivision references. Unless you knew how to read a plat map, you'd have no idea Ridgecrest Estates was involved. Next, I hired Neil Kinsey, an independent licensed surveyor out of Chattanooga with no ties to the county. Neil was 61, built like a fence post, and had testified as an expert witness in more boundary cases than I'd ever worked. He spent 4 days on the mountain with his own equipment and his own crew. His results matched mine to the centimeter. The 40-acre discrepancy was real, documented, and bulletproof. Then Claire pulled the county records. What she found turned a civil dispute into a potential criminal case. When Wade Holt filed his 2011 subdivision plat, he did so in two capacities. First, as the developer, the applicant requesting permission to subdivide. Second, as the chairman of the Planning Commission, the official who reviewed and approved the application. He signed both lines on the same document. The applicant's signature and the commissioner's signature were the same handwriting, dated the same day. In most Tennessee counties, that alone would trigger a conflict of interest investigation. But Wade had been chairing the commission for so long that nobody questioned it. The county clerk recorded the plat, the lots were sold, the homes were built, and 40 acres of someone else's mountain disappeared into the margins. Filing a plat that intentionally misrepresents property boundaries is classified as deed fraud under Tennessee law, TCA Section 39-14-135. It's a Class D felony, 2 to 12 years, up to $50,000 in fines. Claire contacted the district attorney's office. She didn't file a formal complaint, not yet. She requested a meeting, brought the map, showed the DA the two signatures on the same plat, and let the math speak for itself. The DA, a woman named Karen Whitaker, with 20 years of prosecution experience, looked at the overlay and said, "I want this on my desk the day the court rules." Meanwhile, I went dark. I stopped calling the sheriff. I stopped responding to HOA letters. I stopped attending planning commission meetings. I repaired the porch that Vivian's crew had ripped apart, rehung the back door, and replaced the broken windows with double-pane glass. I drove to Knoxville to buy myself. I installed 4 trail cameras at the boundary markers along the encroachment line, battery-powered, motion-activated, weatherproof. Each one pointed at one of the 12 houses built on my land. From Vivian's perspective, it must have looked like I'd surrendered. The noise stopped. The complaints stopped. The defiant surveyor with the paint roller had gone quiet. She had no idea what quiet meant for a man like me. In my career, the most dangerous part of any boundary dispute was never the argument. It was the measurement. The argument was just noise. The measurement was the truth. Claire called me on a Friday evening. Hearing set. 6 weeks. Chancery Court Judge Morrison. Are you ready? I looked at the file on my kitchen table. The deed, the maps, the survey, the photographs, the trail camera footage, the emails, the Zillow screenshots, the certified letters, Sarah's ruined journal pages pressed flat between sheets of wax paper, the few surviving words still legible in her looping handwriting. "I've been ready since she changed my locks," I said. Vivian didn't wait for the 60-day code compliance deadline. She didn't even wait for the building inspector's final report. The week after I went quiet, she went loud. I was in Knoxville at Claire's office reviewing deposition strategy when my phone buzzed. A trail camera alert, then another, then 4 more in rapid succession. I opened the app and watched live footage of a flatbed truck backing up to my cabin with a Bobcat excavator chained to the bed. Behind it, a white dually pickup with Greer Brothers Demolition stenciled on the door. 4 men in hard hats climbed out and started unloading. I called Sheriff Garrison from Claire's parking lot. "Tom, they're tearing down my house." "On my way," he said. "Don't drive angry." I drove angry anyway. 90 minutes of white-knuckled interstate, then 30 minutes of mountain switchbacks, then the last mile of gravel that I took so fast the truck bottomed out twice on the ruts. By the time I pulled up, the damage was done. The front porch, the one I'd rebuilt by hand with salvaged lumber, the one I sat on every morning with my coffee, watching the fog burn off the valley, was ripped away from the house and lying in a pile of splintered boards and bent nails. 3 windows were smashed. The back door I'd rehung 2 weeks earlier was torn from its hinges and tossed in the yard. The generator cables were cut clean, not pulled loose, cut with what looked like bolt cutters. The Bobcat was parked in front of my cabin with the key still in the ignition and the bucket raised like a fist. Sawdust and splinters covered the ground in a wide arc. The smell of fresh-cut pine mixed with diesel exhaust hung in the still mountain air. Broken glass caught the late afternoon sunlight and threw tiny prisms across the mud. Boot prints, heavy work boot treads, circled the foundation in a pattern that told me 4 men had walked the entire perimeter looking for the fastest way to take the building apart. But they'd missed something. The trail camera mounted on the oak tree 40 feet from the front door had recorded everything. I pulled the SD card and played it back on my laptop right there in the yard. The footage was clean. Timestamp date, full color. The Greer brothers crew arriving. The Bobcat being unloaded. The men prying off the porch with crowbars. One of them putting a boot through the front window. Another cutting the generator cables. And the final shot, the one that made my hands go steady and my breathing go calm. Vivian Holt's white Range Rover, parked on the road 200 meters downhill. Vivian herself, leaning against the driver's door, watching through a pair of binoculars. In one hand, the binoculars. In the other, her Yeti tumbler. She was wearing a quilted vest over a cream turtleneck, dark jeans tucked into leather boots. She looked like she was watching a horse race. The audio picked up her voice when the contractor walked down to report. Make sure the porch is completely gone. And cut those cables. If he can't run a generator, he can't live up here. Bill it to the HOA maintenance account. I saved the footage to 3 locations, my laptop, a USB drive, and a cloud backup that Claire could access in Knoxville. Then I called the sheriff. Garrison arrived 20 minutes later. He walked the site in silence, photographing the damage with his own phone. When he finished, he stood by his cruiser and looked at me. This is destruction of property, Mr. Cole, clear as day. Then the Range Rover came up the road. Vivian stepped out in those same boots, same vest, same tumbler. She walked toward us without hurrying. Her face carried that expression I'd come to recognize, the slight lift of the chin, the faint curve of the lips, the eyes that said she was doing you a favor by acknowledging your existence. Sheriff, we're demolishing an unsafe structure as authorized by the County Planning Commission. She pulled a folded paper from her vest pocket, a copy of Wade's demolition review order. It's all documented. Garrison looked at the paper, then at her. A review order isn't a demolition permit, Mrs. Holt, and this man has a court date in 5 weeks that'll determine who owns what. You might want to think about what a judge is going to say when he sees this. Vivian's smile didn't crack. The judge will see a community protecting itself from a squatter, that's all. She drove down the mountain. The sheriff filed his report. My house had holes in it and no porch. I slept on the cot that night with plastic sheeting taped over the broken windows and the mountain wind coming through like it owned the place. It did, and so did I. The emergency HOA meeting was held on a Tuesday evening in the Ridgecrest Community Clubhouse, a low-slung building with vaulted ceilings, stone fireplace, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the pool. Vivian stood at the podium in a tailored navy blazer over a white silk blouse, hair freshly blown out, a wireless microphone clipped to her lapel, like she was hosting a TED Talk. I wasn't there, but Dale was. He sat in the back row and recorded the whole thing on his phone, holding it steady on his knee the way a man does when he knows he's gathering evidence. Vivian's speech lasted 12 minutes. She opened by calling me a transient individual with a questionable tax deed, who was actively devaluing your homes and threatening the safety of your children. She showed photographs of my construction site, shot at angles designed to make a cabin renovation look like a hazmat scene, scrap lumber framed to look like debris, my generator framed to look like industrial equipment, my survey stakes framed to look like some kind of eccentric perimeter defense. This man is turning our mountain into a junkyard, she said, her voice dropping to that practiced, intimate register, the one that makes every listener feel like she's confiding something painful. And if we don't act now, your property values, the investment you've made in this community, will be damaged beyond repair. She proposed a special assessment, $1,800 per household. 48 of 52 families voted yes, some reluctantly, some enthusiastically, most because Vivian had spent 7 years training them to do what she said. Total, $86,400, the Ridgecrest war chest. Vivian hired Thornton Gage and Associates, a Nashville firm with a reputation for aggressive real estate litigation, and an hourly rate that made Claire Pemberton's fee look like a parking meter. They filed a lawsuit against me within 10 days, claiming adverse possession of the mountain cabin and seeking a permanent injunction to halt all renovation work. The legal theory was creative, I'll give them that. They argued that the HOA had exercised open, continuous, and hostile possession of the mountain property for over 7 years through road maintenance, trail clearing, and administrative stewardship. In Tennessee, the adverse possession statute requires 10 years for a standard claim, but they argued that the HOA's actions constituted a special category of community use that should trigger a shorter clock. Claire read the filing and laughed so hard she had to put down her coffee. They're claiming adverse possession on a property they just tried to demolish. You can't simultaneously claim you own something and destroy it. That's not law. That's a personality disorder. But Vivian wasn't finished. She filed a separate complaint with county code enforcement, reporting my property as an illegal campsite operating without sanitation permits. A code enforcement officer named Lyle Drummond drove up the mountain, looked at my cabin, which had running water from the spring, a composting toilet I'd installed myself, and a solar panel array I'd ordered from a supplier in Asheville, and told me he'd need to file a report, but saw nothing that warranted a cease and desist. The lawsuit papers arrived on a Thursday, a thick manila envelope with a Nashville return address, 3 attorneys listed, 14 pages of legal argument. I read it at the kitchen table by lamplight, eating canned vegetable soup straight from the pot, because I'd lost my only other bowl when Vivian's crew dragged my belongings into the rain. Dale came by that evening with a bag of groceries, bread, peanut butter, apples, and a 6-pack of Yingling that he set on the counter without a word. "They're spending $86,000 to take your house," he said. "How much you spending?" "About $47,000 less than that." "How?" "Because I don't need 3 Nashville lawyers to prove where a boundary line is. I just need the line." Dale opened 2 beers, handed me one, and sat in the chair by the window. We drank in silence while the wind pressed against the plastic sheeting and the mountain settled into its nighttime sounds. Owls, branches, the distant hum of the creek that ran off the north ridge. The quiet title hearing was 6 weeks away. Neil Kinsey's independent survey was sealed and filed with the court. The DA had the fraud evidence. Claire's case was airtight. I repaired what I could of the porch with salvaged lumber, not pretty but functional. Enough to sit on in the morning with my coffee. The broken windows stayed covered in plastic. The wind came through every night. I slept in a thermal sleeping bag on the cot and kept my boots by the door in case the temperature dropped below freezing. I didn't leave the mountain once in those 6 weeks. I didn't need to. Everything I needed was already filed, measured, staked, and waiting. The Chancery Court hearing was scheduled for 10 in the morning on a Wednesday in January. By 9:15, the courtroom was standing room only. Vivian had organized a chartered bus from Ridgecrest. All 52 households invited attendance strongly encouraged. Most of them came. They filled the gallery like spectators at a sentencing, which, in a way, they were. They just didn't know whose. Jenny Tate from the Blount County Herald sat in the press row with a notebook and a digital recorder. Sheriff Garrison stood near the back door, in full uniform, hat in his hands. Dale Sutter sat in the last row, quiet as a fence post, his phone in his breast pocket, recording audio. Vivian and Wade sat in the front row. She wore a cream blazer with gold buttons, pearl earrings, and heels that clicked on the courtroom tile when she crossed her legs. Wade wore a charcoal suit and a burgundy tie, and the expression of a man who'd spent 15 years getting everything he wanted. They looked like they were attending a charity gala, not a property hearing. The 3 Thornton Gage attorneys sat at the respondents' table in matching navy suits with monogrammed briefcases. Their lead counsel was a man named Harrington. Silver hair, firm handshake, the kind of voice that makes a jury lean forward. Harrington presented first. His argument was smooth, practiced, and 15 minutes long. He described the HOA's decade of investment in the mountain property road maintenance trail, clearing security patrols. He cited Tennessee adverse possession precedent. He called the tax sale deed procedurally valid but substantively meaningless, and asked the court to deny the quiet title claim. Then Claire Pemberton stood up, 5'4", brown hair pulled back, a single manila folder in her hand. She didn't use notes. "Your Honor, I'd like to show the court 2 maps." She projected the first image on the courtroom screen. Harlan Whitfield's 1962 plat, the original survey, filed at the county clerk's office. India Inc. on linen. Parcel 114-007, 720 acres. The entire mountain base to ridgeline. Then she projected the second image. Wade Holt's 2011 subdivision plat, 80 acres at the base, Ridgecrest Estates. These two maps should align, Claire said. They don't. She overlaid them. The boundary lines diverged, like two roads splitting at a fork. Wade's line ran 400 meters higher up the slope than Whitfield's. The gap between them, the 40 acres that existed on one map but not the other, glowed red on the screens. 40 acres of parcel 114-007 were absorbed into the Ridgecrest subdivision plat without legal conveyance, without sale, without easement, and without the knowledge or consent of the property owner, Claire said. Those 40 acres belong to my client Ethan Cole, by deed recorded at the county clerk's office. They have belonged to his parcel since 1962. She let that hang in the courtroom air for 3 seconds. I counted. 12 homes in Ridgecrest Estates are built on Mr. Cole's land. The community swimming pool is on his land. The tennis courts are on his land. The main entrance road crosses his land for 300 meters. She paused. Including Lot 47, the personal residence of Wade and Vivian Holt. Assessed value, $2.4 million. Built entirely on parcel 114-007. The room split open. Gasps from the gallery. HOA residents turning to look at each other, then at the Holts, then back at the screen. A woman in the 4th row whispered, "Oh my God." Jenny Tate's pen stopped moving. Even Harrington's composure flickered, a brief tightening around the jaw that only a courtroom veteran would catch. Claire presented Neil Kinsey's independent survey confirming the boundary to the centimeter. She presented the county clerk's original records. She presented the tax sale deed, the chain of title, and the plat comparison side by side. Then she turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we would also like to enter into evidence that the 2011 subdivision plat was filed by Mr. Wade Holt in his capacity as developer and approved by Mr. Wade Holt in his capacity as Planning Commission chairman. Same document, same signature, both lines." Wade Holt's face went the color of old drywall. His hand gripped the armrest of the gallery pew. Vivian sat perfectly still, her smile frozen in place like a mask someone forgot to remove. The judge asked me if I had anything to add. I stood up. I didn't look at the judge. I looked at Vivian. "Mrs. Holt, you spent 7 years telling people you own this neighborhood. You changed my locks. You threw my wife's photographs in the rain. You put my house on Zillow. You sent men with a bobcat to tear it apart. You raised $86,000 from your neighbors to sue me out of my own home." I kept my voice level. "But you don't even own the ground your house is standing on. I do. I own the whole mountain, and your mansion is sitting right on top of it." The courtroom was silent. Vivian's smile finally broke not into anger, not into tears, but into nothing. Just a blank, hollow stillness, like a window with the light gone out behind it. Judge Morrison ruled from the bench. Quiet title granted. All 720 acres of parcel 114-007 confirmed as the property of Ethan Allen Cole. The adverse possession claim was denied on all counts. Sheriff Garrison walked to the front of the courtroom. He stopped beside Wade Holt and spoke quietly. "Mr. Holt, the district attorney's office has asked me to inform you that you are under investigation for deed fraud under TCA Section 39-14-135. I'd advise you not to leave the county." Wade didn't move. Vivian stared straight ahead, her latte untouched on the bench beside her, condensation running down the cup and pooling on the wood. Jenny Tate was already writing the lead. The indictment came down 6 weeks later. 2 counts of deed fraud against Wade Holt. He resigned from the Planning Commission the same day. His developer's license was suspended pending trial. The Blount County Herald ran the story above the fold. Vivian was removed as HOA president by emergency vote 48-4. The war chest was ordered returned. Thornton Gage sent Vivian a final invoice for $34,000. She paid it out of pocket. I had a decision to make about the 12 homes on my land. Claire laid out the options: ejectment, actions, market rate buyouts, or something else. I chose something else. I offered each household a ground lease $200 a month, 30-year term right of first refusal, below market rate by a factor of 3. Claire thought I was too generous. I told her I wasn't punishing homeowners for Wade Holt's fraud. They bought their lots in good faith. They raised their kids there. They didn't draw the line Wade did. All 12 families signed. The pool and tennis courts stayed open. The entrance road got a permanent easement. The lease income funded 2 things. First, the Smoky Mountain Forest Conservation Trust, 600 acres of the mountain, placed under permanent conservation easement. No one would build on that slope again. Second, the Sarah Cole Memorial Scholarship, awarded annually to a child in Blount County who had lost a parent. The first recipient was a 14-year-old girl from Alcoa, whose father died in a construction accident. She wanted to study environmental science. Sarah would have loved her. The cabin took 4 more months to finish. I rebuilt the porch with hand-carved poplar railings and a swing from plans I found in Sarah's watercolor notebook she'd sketched it years ago, with the word "someday" written underneath in her looping handwriting. I hung it facing east. Solar panels on the south roof, a wood stove from reclaimed iron, running water from the spring gravity-fed. Sarah's wedding photo above the fireplace in a new frame, new glass. The water line stayed. Some damage you don't fix. You carry it forward and let it remind you what you're protecting. Vivian and Wade put lot 47 on the market. It sat for 7 months. Every buyer's agent called me about the ground lease. I told them the truth. Vivian sold at a $400,000 loss and moved to Nashville. Wade's trial was pending. They didn't leave together. Dale came up the mountain the day the swing was finished. He brought coffee and sat in the chair by the railing. "Old Harlan would have liked you," he said. "Why?" "He always said the mountain picks who stays." We watched the fog settle into the valley, filling the gaps between 52 rooftops like a slow white river. Somewhere below Vivian's for sale sign was still stuck in the yard of a mansion built on my dirt. In spring, Pastor Wheeler organized the first Ridgecrest Mountain Festival on my land. I manned the grill. The 12 families brought side dishes and stayed until the fireflies came out. A kid asked me what a surveyor does. I told him we figure out where things really belong. I came to this mountain to disappear, found a broken house and a woman who wanted to take it. Instead, I found something worth keeping. Not just the land, the people on it, and the truth measured, staked, and permanent that nobody can take what's already yours. If you've had an HOA president try to claim something that doesn't belong to them, tell me your story in the comments. And if you want to hear what happened when another Karen bulldozed a veteran's memorial garden and discovered the veteran was a retired federal judge, hit subscribe. That one's coming next.
You know what gets me about this story? It's not the fraud, or the board card, or the $86,000 war chest. It's the confidence. Vivian walked onto that man's porch on day 1, smiled at him like she was the bug on her windshield, and told him to live on his own house. She was so certain, she was so untouchable, that she never once considered the possibility she was wrong. That's the thing about people who build their identity without control. They stop shaking the ground they're standing on. Literally, she spent 7 years collecting HOA dues from families whose homes sat on someone else's garden, and she never knew she was too busy looking down at everyone else to ever look down at her own feet. Ethan Cole didn't beat her with anger or money. He beat her with a tape measure, a theodolite, and the patience to let the truth do the work. If someone in your HOA acts like their own word, check the deed, check the plat, check the boundary. The people who scream the loudest about what this are often standing on ground they never paid for. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment. I read every single one.